Elon Musk takes the stand against OpenAI, big tech reveals hundreds of billions in AI infrastructure spending, and Google employees mutiny over a classified Pentagon deal. Welcome to the Jamgamine Daily Rundown. I am Anna, your co-host. This podcast is researched and produced by Etienne Newman, senior software engineer from University Laval, based in Calgary, Alberta. Today, we perform a forensic autopsy on the cost of scale this Wednesday, April 29th, 2026. The AI industry is caught between staggering financial growth and intense ideological warfare. On the business front, a QuadKill of tech earnings from Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Meta has revealed unprecedented capital expenditures, with giants guiding up to $200 billion in AI spending. To capitalize on this, OpenAI has officially expanded its models to Amazon Web Services, breaking its total reliance on Microsoft Azure. But this scale has a dark side. In an Oakland federal court, Elon Musk testified that OpenAI stole a charity to reach its trillion-dollar valuation. Simultaneously, Google is facing a massive internal revolt, with over 600 employees demanding the CEO cancel a newly signed classified AI contract with the Pentagon. Meanwhile, regulators are striking back, with the EU threatening Meta with massive fines over underage user checks, and China freezing robotaxi expansion after a catastrophic Baidu outage. Before we dive into the data, a quick reminder: subscribe to Jamgamine on Apple Podcasts to always listen completely ads-free. Today's episode is brought to you by Jamgamine and our partners at Area. When big tech is burning hundreds of billions on data centers and fighting existential lawsuits, your enterprise needs flawless technical intelligence. Jamgamine delivers the human-verified audio forensics the C-suite relies on to map out true ROI. Visit djamgamine.com, and a special thank you to Area for co-sponsoring today's briefing. Let's unravel the day.
Imagine for a second 100 self-driving cars just suddenly freezing right in the middle of a major city intersection.
Yeah, completely paralyzing metropolitan traffic, just a total gridlock.
Exactly. And now I want you to imagine a tech giant spending $200 billion in a single year, and this is not on their core business, but purely on a physical plumbing for a technology they aren't entirely sure how to monetize yet.
Right.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today is April 29th, 2026, and the predictable, weightless playbook of Silicon Valley is officially out the window.
Completely out the window.
You're doing a forensic autopsy on an AI industry that has reached an absolute boiling point today. We're calling this deep dive the cost of scale, CapEx, courts, and contracts.
I like that title. It really captures the chaos.
Yeah, well, we've gathered a huge stack of sources for you today. We've got macroeconomic tech earnings reports, courtroom dispatches from a massive federal trial playing out in Oakland, and some really heavy regulatory crackdowns from both the European Union and China.
And you know, the contrast in your sources is striking, because we're looking at this through the lens of business strategy and digital rights, which means focusing heavily on the macroeconomic reality.
Right, the actual numbers.
Exactly. Software is supposed to scale infinitely, right, with almost zero physical friction. But what we're seeing today is infinite ambition slamming face first into very heavy, very finite physical and economic walls.
Which brings us right to the numbers. Analysts are actually calling this latest round of tech earnings the QuadKill.
Yeah, that's a dramatic name, but it fits.
It totally fits. Let's look at the capital expenditure guidance, the CapEx, because honestly, these figures barely sound real anymore. We have Google targeting between $175 billion and $185 billion for 2026.
Which is astronomical.
Right. Microsoft is running at $150 billion run rate. Meta is aiming for $115 billion to $135 billion. And then there is Amazon guiding for a staggering $200 billion.
And to put that into perspective for you, that $200 billion from Amazon, that is not their total operating budget. That is CapEx. That is money strictly dedicated to physical assets.
Okay, hold on. Let's unpack this for the listener. Because what are they actually buying with $200 billion?
Yeah.
Are we talking about like millions of individual server racks, or is this the actual power plants required to run them?
Well, it's all of the above. I mean, they are buying the land, securing the water rights to actually cool the facilities, building massive electrical substations, and of course, buying hundreds of thousands of specialized silicon chips.
Wow.
You're essentially building digital heavy industry from scratch. And what's fascinating from the earnings reports is how this unprecedented build out is even being financed.
Because they have to get that cash from somewhere.
Exactly. The core legacy businesses of these tech giants are essentially acting as massive piggy banks right now. Google Cloud revenue was up 48% in the fourth quarter. Microsoft Azure was up 39%.
Huge margins.
Right. Meta saw ad impressions rise 18%, and Amazon's sneaky ad business hit $21.3 billion.
Yeah, Google even noted that their Gemini API usage exceeded 10 billion tokens per minute. And just for the listener who isn't a developer, a token is essentially a fragment of a word, right?
Roughly, yeah.
So we're talking about processing 10 billion word fragments every 60 seconds.
And that level of throughput requires an incomprehensible amount of electricity and compute power. So they're taking the massive cash flow from those legacy businesses, the ads, the traditional cloud, and funneling it directly into this AI infrastructure build-out.
But here is the multi-billion-dollar question that the market is clearly starting to ask.
Yeah.
Where is the return on that investment?
The ROI.
Right, because it feels like we're building the world's most expensive $200 billion toll roads without actually knowing if enough cars even exist to pay the tolls.
That is the perfect analogy.
I mean, are these companies securing durable, long-term enterprise revenue, or is this just a panic buy?
Yeah.
Are they just hoarding scarce compute capacity because of FOMO?
It's a bit of both, but the fear of depreciation is what turns that toll rate analogy into a nightmare scenario for these executives.
How so?
Well, if you spend $200 billion on servers and specialized chips today, those physical assets depreciate. They have a lifespan of maybe 3 to 4 years before they become totally obsolete and lose their value.
Because the next generation chips comes out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if the cars, meaning the massive enterprise software contracts, don't show up by year 3 to generate equivalent revenue, that depreciation cliff violently drags down your profit margins.
Wow.
AWS growth needs to accelerate significantly to justify this. If it just stays in the mid 20% range, that CapEx suddenly looks like a historic misallocation of capital.
So they need those growth rates to start with a 3 or the math just collapses.
Pretty much. The cleanest read we have on actual enterprise demand right now comes from Microsoft's remaining performance obligations, or RPO. That metric hit $625 billion last earnings, up 110% year over year.
Hey, $625 billion.
Yeah, and roughly 45% of that is coming directly from OpenAI.
Okay, let's clarify RPO real quick. That is essentially contracted revenue that hasn't been recognized yet, right? It's future money on the books.
Yeah.
Like enterprises have signed the contracts for Azure, for M365 Copilots, for GitHub Copilot.
Yeah, but more than just future money, it is a lifeline. It proves there is a massive appetite out there. But the pressure to convert that raw compute power into actual undeniable business value it's immense.
And when companies are burning hundreds of billions of dollars on compute and data center capacity, like Amazon's $200 billion guide and Google's $185 billion target, deploying AI effectively at the enterprise level isn't just about the model, it's about the management infrastructure. We want to thank our sponsor, AIRI, pronounced A-I-R-I-A, for making today's briefing possible. AIRA provides the enterprise-grade AI management platform that organizations actually need to turn raw compute into measurable workflow automation. You can find their link in the show notes.
You know, that transition you just mentioned from raw compute to measurable workflow automation, that is the central anxiety of the entire industry right now.
Oh, absolutely.
Because these companies have to justify the infrastructure costs before depreciation eats them alive, we are seeing fractured alliances and deeply controversial deals popping up everywhere.
Yeah, OpenAI and Amazon are a perfect example of this. So on Monday, OpenAI renegotiated their strict cloud exclusivity deal with Microsoft. Literally the next day, the very next day, OpenAI announces they're launching GPT 5.5 and their Codex coding agent on Amazon Web Services through Amazon Bedrock.
Right.
They even launched managed agents on AWS. Why run to Amazon the second you have breathing room from Microsoft?
It's all about diversification of compute. I mean, OpenAI cannot afford to be entirely reliant on Microsoft's Azure infrastructure if they want to maintain any leverage in the industry.
Makes sense.
And from Amazon's side, they desperately need a premium model like GPT 5.5 to drive adoption of their custom silicon. Amazon has a $50 billion investment tied to 2 gigawatts of their own Trainium chips.
2 gigawatts, that's a city's worth of power.
Exactly. And they want enterprises to rent Amazon hardware, not just NVIDIA hardware hosted on Amazon servers.
The opacity of these models still amazes me, though. Our sources from Wired highlighted that OpenAI's Codex model has hidden system instructions explicitly forbidding it from talking about, get this, goblins, gremlins, raccoons, trolls, ogres, or pigeons. unless it is absolutely relevant.
Yeah, I saw that.
Sam Altman was even joking about the model having a goblin moment. It is funny, but it reveals a stark reality. You have billions of dollars riding on these frontier models, and underneath the hood, engineers are still basically applying duct tape to keep the AI from hallucinating about pigeons.
It's wild. It really highlights the immaturity of the technology compared to the maturity of the capital being invested.
Yeah.
And that pressure for immediate ROI is pushing these companies to cross lines they previously swore they would never, ever touch.
Which brings us to Google's scramble for government contracts. This is a big one. Google just signed a classified AI deal with the Pentagon. The contract reportedly opens Google's models to any lawful government purpose, and Google has zero legal right to veto how the military uses it.
And to push this through, Google completely scrubbed the no weapons pledge from its AI principles.
Right. And I want to be clear here to the listener. We aren't taking a political stance on defense spending. We are just impartially looking at the business autopsy here. But that pledge was implemented back in 2018, wasn't it?
Yeah, 2018, it was the direct result of massive staff protests over Project Maven, which was an early military drone initiative.
Right. And the blowback this week was immediate. Over 600 Google employees sent an open letter to CEO Sundar Pichai demanding he reject the use of AI for military purposes.
And looking at this purely through the lens of a forensic business autopsy, you can see why the idealism is clashing with the balance sheet.
Totally. Because in 2018, staff idealism successfully stopped weapons contracts. But today, with a $195 billion CapEx bill hanging over the executive team, moral red lines become incredibly expensive to maintain.
Very expensive.
I mean, does employee idealism even stand a chance against the sheer gravitational pull of defense spending at this scale?
Historically, no. When the financial stakes reach the hundreds of billions, the structure and the ethos of an organization will inevitably warp to support that scale.
Right.
OpenAI and xAI both inked Pentagon deals recently, too. The defense sector is an enormous, reliable revenue stream that simply doesn't care about consumer advertising fluctuations.
Which Google and Meta rely on heavily.
Exactly. We are seeing a similar dynamic with Anthropic right now. Axios reported that the White House is actually backtracking on labeling Anthropic a supply chain risk.
Wait, really? Why the sudden change?
Because the government suddenly wants access to Anthropic's new Mythos cybersecurity model. So they are pivoting to revive their collaboration.
The state needs the frontier capabilities, and the labs need the state's budget. It is just an inevitable convergence.
Right.
But, this warping of corporate ethos is actually the exact subject of a massive trial playing out in federal court in Oakland right now.
Yes, Elon Musk versus OpenAI, Sam Altman, and Greg Brockman.
It's exactly. Musk testified that OpenAI entirely abandoned its founding mission. They shifted from a nonprofit research charity to a capped for-profit company. He told the jurors that this pivot essentially amounts to stealing a charity.
Those were his exact words.
He argued that allowing OpenAI to operate this way sets a dangerous legal precedent for the leading of every charity in America.
Yeah, he claims Altman and Brockman basically used his initial funding and his reputation to get the lab off the ground under the guise of an open-source charity, only to betray those core principles the second a $1 trillion valuation was on the table.
But the defense had a pretty strong counter to that, right?
Very strong. OpenAI's defense, which is led by lawyer William Savitt, presented a sharply different narrative, and it's based on documentary evidence.
Right, actual emails.
Exactly. Savitt countered that it was actually Musk who pushed to restructure OpenAI as a for-profit entity back in 2017.
Because Musk looked at the math, right? And realized how much compute power they were going to need to reach artificial general intelligence.
Exactly the same CapEx realities we're discussing today.
Wow.
Savitt argued that Musk wanted majority control of that new for-profit entity, didn't get it, walked away, and is now simply weaponizing the federal court system to hobble a direct competitor to his own AI company, xAI.
Let's look at the equity split post-conversion, because this is where the paradox really crystallizes. Microsoft now owns 27% of OpenAI, and the original nonprofit only retains 26%.
Right.
I mean, here's where it gets really interesting. Think about the irony of this structure. It is like starting a humble neighborhood community garden to feed people for free, right? But then you realize you need specialized fertilizer. So suddenly the garden morphs into a massive corporate agribusiness, and the original founders are suing each other in federal court over who gets the rights to sell the tractors.
That is a brilliant way to put it. The underlying question here is whether a nonprofit AI frontier lab is just a complete oxymoron.
It seems like it.
Yeah.
If a nonprofit has to sell off 27% of itself to a mega corporation just to buy enough server racks to survive the year, the economic viability of that charitable model seems dead on arrival.
It really does. Although we do have a fascinating contrast in the sources regarding efficiency. Researchers just demoed an AI called Talkie.
Oh yeah, POC.
Yeah, it is a 13 billion parameter vintage model.
Okay, let's define parameter for the listener quickly. Think of a parameter as a connection, like a synapse in the AI's digital brain. So 13 billion is incredibly small compared to the trillion-plus parameters in something like GPT-4.
Very small. And the wild thing is, Talkie was trained solely on public domain text from before 1931.
So no modern internet at all.
None. It never saw modern web data, yet it learned to code in Python simply by generalizing the underlying logic it found in older texts.
That's incredible.
It is an incredibly efficient, elegant experiment, but, and this is the key word, experiment, to build the robust, multimodal frontier models that power a global enterprise, the systems driving this $250 billion CapEx cycle, you cannot rely on 13 billion parameters. You need industrial scale.
But that industrial scale is exactly what is slamming into a very hard, very physical wall right now. Big tech can fight over cloud supremacy and courtroom definitions all day, but global regulators and physical city grids, they do not care about their CapEx requirements.
No, they don't. We are seeing the physical and regulatory limits of scale being severely tested right now.
Let's start with Europe.
Right. So in Europe, the European Commission has issued a preliminary ruling against Meta under the Digital Services Act. The Commission found that Meta's underage checks on Instagram and Facebook are systematically failing.
Just total broken.
Yeah. Children under 13 are easily bypassing the restrictions simply by entering false birth dates.
And the regulatory friction here is severe because the EU is threatening a fine of up to 6% of Meta's worldwide annual turnover.
Not just profit, their entire global revenue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When your company is projecting $135 billion in CapEx just to build data centers, losing 6% of your entire global revenue to a fine is a catastrophic hit to the balance sheet.
It's massive. And the Commission is demanding that Meta implement age assurance technologies that are accurate, effective, and non-intrusive.
Which,
from an engineering standpoint, verifying a user's biological age across a global user base without violating privacy laws, that is a brutally difficult technical challenge.
the software wants to scale instantly to every user on the planet. But the societal friction, in this case, protecting children, forces it to a dead halt. And if the EU is providing the regulatory friction, China is providing the physical friction.
Absolutely. The situation in Wuhan illustrates this perfectly. On March 31st, more than 100 Baidu Apollo Go robotaxis suddenly stalled out on the streets.
Just froze.
Over 100 autonomous cars just froze.
They stranded passengers inside and completely snarled city traffic across major intersections.
Yeah.
You know, a software bug in a web browser means you just hit refresh. A software bug in a fleet of 2-ton vehicles means metropolitan gridlock.
And the response was swift. 3 Chinese government agencies, including the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, stepped in and halted everything.
There's the plug.
Yep. They stopped issuing all new licenses for autonomous vehicles. They demanded a full self-review from the companies and better physical safety monitoring.
And there's no clear end date for this suspension either, right?
None. It completely blocks Baidu, Pony AI, and WeRide from adding level 4 vehicles, which are vehicles fully autonomous within a geofenced area. They cannot start new test projects, and they cannot expand to new cities.
And their stock.
Oh, their shares tanked the moment the news broke.
You know, Silicon Valley has always operated on the mantra of move fast and break things.
Yeah.
But when you are breaking international child safety laws and paralyzing metropolitan traffic grids, that playbook finally runs out of road.
It really does.
Software is weightless. It wants to scale infinitely at zero marginal cost. But you cannot infinitely scale a stalled car in an intersection.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that is the defining conflict of the specific era of AI. The intelligence might be artificial, but the infrastructure required to run it is intensely physical.
Yeah.
The gigawatts of power, the concrete data centers, the defense contracts, the societal impact on children, the autonomous vehicles on physical streets. All of that has immense mass and friction. You cannot just code your way out of a regulatory freeze or a power grid shortage.
Which brings us back to the narrative arc of what we've covered today. It is a wild trajectory. We started this deep dive with 4 companies authorizing $250 billion in infrastructure spending.
The QuadKill.
Right. We explored how the sheer gravity of that financial pressure forces these frontier labs into classified Pentagon deals, and how it tears apart the foundational charitable ethos of the industry's biggest players in federal court. And we ended with the immovable physical walls of European regulation and Wuhan traffic.
It is a stark reminder that the digital world, no matter how advanced the models get, remains entirely dependent on the physical one. The technology itself is extraordinary, but the scaffolding required to support it is fragile, controversial, and immensely expensive.
And that is why this matters so much to you listening to this. Behind every shiny new AI tool you test out, every co-pilot auto-completing your code, every chat interface you use to summarize a meeting, there is a brutal macroeconomic war happening in the background.
Absolutely.
It is a war that is reshaping cloud computing architecture, taxing global power grids, and violently shifting the ethical boundaries of the world's most powerful corporations.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We've seen today that the current tech ecosystem requires hundreds of billions of dollars a year in physical infrastructure just to maintain its momentum. So what happens to the global economy the moment the market decides the AI hype is peaked and all those promised enterprise revenues never actually arrive to pay off the servers?
That's the trillion-dollar question.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon to unpack the next layer. Until then, keep questioning the scale.
That concludes our forensic briefing for April 29th. The strategic signal for today is the infrastructure ultimatum. The tech earnings QuadKill proves that the AI race is no longer just about who has the smartest model. It is about who has the capital to build the biggest data centers before the music stops. But as Elon Musk's testimony and Google's employee mutiny demonstrate, rebuilding the world's digital infrastructure requires a social license to operate, one that is currently fraying. If you want to own your infrastructure instead of being managed by it, head over to jamgamind.com/toolkit for the AI Executive Toolkit. And as a special bonus, get exclusive discount codes for Google Workspace and Etienne's personal pro apps by emailing Etienne. Etienne's email is in the show notes. This episode was made possible by DJamGamind and Area. Subscribe to the DJamGamind channel on Apple Podcasts to always listen completely ads-free. I am Anna. Stay sharp and keep unraveling the future.
And before you go, if your company is building the tools that power the workflows we talked about today, I'd love to showcase them to this audience. We don't just run ads, we build technical simulations that prove your value. Let's build something together. Visit jamgamind.com/partners to get started. Until next time, keep building.